A man walked into the night with empty pockets and a desperate heart. He did not look back. He did not hesitate. The hunger for more had already taken hold. There are whispers of an old path, one that promises riches beyond measure. A path where wishes are granted, but never freely. Once your name is spoken in that place, there is no turning back. This is the story of a man who reached for gold and found something waiting in the dark. Ola was a man of many dreams but few possessions. Each morning, he rose before the sun, setting up his humble stall in the village market. He arranged his goods, dried fish, woven mats, carved trinkets, hoping that today, fortune would finally smile upon him. But fortune never did. The villagers passed by, their hands reaching for the finer things. They crowded around the stalls of the wealthy traders, men draped in rich fabrics, men who never lifted a finger to labor, yet always had more. They spoke with heavy purses, their laughter full of ease, while Ola's voice grew hoarse from calling out prices that no one cared to hear. Day after day, he watched. Their wealth did not come from skill. It did not come from effort. It came from something else. Something he could not grasp. He ate little. His clothes grew thin. His back ached from long hours under the scorching sun. And yet, the men of riches grew fatter, their wares multiplying, their homes expanding. Ola's resentment swelled. He could not understand how a man could toil from dawn to dusk and remain with nothing while another sat in the shade and lived like a king. One evening, as the last traders packed up their stalls, he lingered. His hands were empty, his profits gone before they could be counted. He watched as the wealthiest of them all rode through the market square, his robes flowing like the river, his horse draped in cloth finer than anything Ola had ever touched. Ola's fist clenched. He knew men who had worked their whole lives and never touched such wealth. How, then, did this one man, this single man, hold more than the entire village combined? He did not sleep that night. Restless thoughts turned over and over in his mind. If there was a secret to wealth, if there was a way beyond the sweat of a brow and the ache of a back, then he would find it. The next day, his path crossed with that of an old man, a stranger to the village, draped in tattered robes that seemed to shift in color when no one was looking. His skin was wrinkled like the bark of an ancient tree, his eyes dull and distant, yet sharp when they fell upon Ola. The old man spoke in a voice neither kind nor cruel, a voice that seemed to come from a place beyond time. He spoke of wealth, wealth beyond counting, riches that would never run dry. He spoke of gold flowing like water, of land stretching farther than the eye could see. And then, in a whisper that barely stirred the air, he spoke of a shrine. A place known to few, feared by many. A place where the desperate go to ask, and the unseen answer. Ola listened. He listened as a man drowning in thirst listens to the promise of rain. He did not ask how the old man knew of his hunger. He did not ask why he was chosen to hear these words. He only asked one thing. What must be done? Ola's heart was restless, his mind consumed by the words of the old man. The thought of wealth, endless and flowing, gnawed at him until it became a hunger no food could satisfy. He had spent years watching, yearning, envying. Now, he had been given a path. But not all paths are meant to be walked. The villagers spoke in hushed tones about a sorcerer who lived beyond the river, a man who knew the ways of the unseen. They said his hut was older than the trees around it, that he spoke to things no one else could hear. They said those who sought him always returned different, if they returned at all. Ola did not care for warnings. He found the hut where the old sorcerer sat among bones and dried herbs, his eyes milky, his fingers long and thin, moving as if weaving something unseen. Before Ola could speak, the sorcerer raised his head, his lips curling into something between a smile and a knowing grimace. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but it carried weight heavier than stone. He spoke of a place hidden deep in the forest, a place where few dared to go. The black shrine, where the boundary between this world and the next was thin. Where the old spirits listened. Where desires were granted, but always at a cost. Many had gone there before. Some had returned, but they were never the same. Others had never come back at all. The sorcerer warned Ola. He told him that nothing from the shrine was given freely. That the spirits had no kindness, only hunger. That a debt, once owed, would be collected, no matter how long it took. Ola's hands clenched. He had come too far to turn back now. The thought of returning to his market stall, to his empty pockets, to the life he had always known, filled him with something worse than fear. It filled him with disgust. The sorcerer studied him for a long time, then slowly nodded. He reached into the folds of his robe and pulled out a bundle wrapped in black cloth. He placed it before Ola without a word. Ola hesitated before unwrapping it. Inside was a single object, a small, smooth stone, dark as the night sky, colder than death itself. The sorcerer told him to take it to the shrine, to stand before the altar under the next full moon, to speak his desire into the wind, and to be prepared for what answered. That night, Ola walked into the forest alone. The air was heavy, thick with something unseen, something that watched, something that waited. The trees twisted as if whispering secrets to each other. The wind carried voices he could not understand, voices that seemed to call his name. Above him, the moon hung low and red, staining the earth in its glow. His steps slowed, but he did not stop. He reached a clearing where the ground was bare, lifeless. A great altar stood before him, its surface carved with symbols older than any man. The black stone in his hand grew warm, pulsing as if alive. Then the whisper ceased. A silence deeper than any he had ever known swallowed the air, pressing against his skin, against his bones. And then, from the shadows, something stirred. A voice, deep and hollow, rose from the darkness. It did not come from the earth. It did not come from the sky. It came from everywhere at once. It called his name. It asked him what he desired. And then it asked what he was willing to give. Ola did not remember the journey back to his home. The night had swallowed him, and when it released him, the world had changed. The sun rose over the village, casting golden light on a man who had never known fortune. But as Ola lifted his hands, something glittered between his fingers. The black stone was gone, and in its place, gold ran through his palms like water. It poured from his sleeves, spilled from his feet, poured at his door. By midday, his store was no longer a store. It had grown into a marketplace of its own, filled with the finest goods, silks from distant lands, spices richer than the village had ever known. He did not call out to customers anymore. They came to him eager, desperate, their hands clutching at the wealth he now controlled. The same men who had once looked past him now bowed their heads when they spoke his name. The same villagers who had ignored his struggle now whispered of his greatness. Gold built his house, each stone polished, each beam carved with the finest detail. His land stretched far, his fields heavy with harvest, though he had never lifted a hoe to the soil. He took a wife, the most beautiful in the village, her skin like smooth ebony, her eyes wide with admiration. He threw feasts that lasted for days. The finest meats, the richest wines, laughter echoing into the night. Music filled the air, drums and flutes playing in his honor. Guests came from far and wide, eager to taste the life he had built, eager to stand in the presence of a man who had once been nothing. But the wind carried more than the sound of celebration. Some nights, when the guests had gone and the fires had burned low, Ola would hear it. A whisper, faint at first, then louder, calling through the walls of his grand home. A voice that did not belong to his wife, nor to his servants. The air grew colder in the rooms where no one stood. Candles flickered, though no breeze passed through. One evening, as he walked through his halls, he caught sight of something in the polished surface of a bronze plate. It was his reflection, standing perfectly still, watching him. His hand moved, but the image did not follow. His breath caught in his throat, but before he could look away, the reflection's lips parted. No words came, only silence, thick and pressing. Then the whispers rose once more. The debt must be paid. He turned away, but the words followed him, slipping into the corners of his mind, calling in the shadows beneath his bed, weaving through the laughter at his feast. The first sign of the price came quietly. His wife, once full of warmth, began to wake in the night, staring at the ceiling with hollow eyes. She would not speak of the dreams that troubled her. She only held onto him tighter, as if something waited for her beyond the edges of the darkness. Then, his firstborn son fell ill. A boy once full of life now lay weak, his breath shallow, his skin burning with fever no healer could cure. No medicine, no offering to the gods, no prayers brought relief. His cries filled the house, but outside, the wind carried only laughter. The gold still poured. The land still flourished. The people still bowed. But Ola no longer heard the music. He no longer tasted the wine. The weight of his wealth pressed heavier than stone. The whispers did not leave him. They followed him through the halls, through the streets, through his dreams. The debt must be paid. Ola no longer found sleep. When he closed his eyes, the whispers crept closer, their voices no longer distant but right beside him, breathing against his skin. When he woke, he found the air thick with something unseen, something waiting. His wife began to change. She no longer met his gaze, no longer spoke his name. She moved through their grand home like a ghost, her feet light upon the floor, her eyes hollow with something deeper than sorrow. One night, without a word, she left. She took nothing with her, not a single jewel, not a single thread of the fine cloth he had given her. Only silence remained in her place. His servants followed. One by one, they vanished, slipping away into the night. The marketplace that had once been filled with eager voices grew quiet. The laughter of the villagers, once filled with admiration, now carried a different tone, one of caution, one of fear. They spoke of him in whispers, of his rise, of his fortune, of the curse that surely came with it. The gold that had once flowed so freely began to change. He woke one morning to find a handful of coins clutched in his palm, but when he looked closer, they were no longer coins at all. They crumbled to dust between his fingers, falling to the ground in lifeless heaps. The great piles of wealth in his storehouse thinned, the golden fabrics turned to ragged threads, the rich meats rotted on their plates before they could be touched. The land that had flourished beneath his feet grew barren. The crops withered. The fruit blackened on the vine. The cattle, once fat and strong, lay unmoving in the fields. Ola was alone. That night, sleep finally came for him. But it was not the rest he longed for. It was the warning he feared. In his dream, he stood in the clearing where he had made the pact, the altar before him as it had been that night beneath the blood-red moon. The wind did not blow, the trees did not sway, but the air pulsed with something unseen. A voice rose from the darkness, thick with laughter, filled with something cruel and unshaken. It spoke his name as if it had always known it, as if it had always waited for this moment. Ola, did you think this was free? The laughter grew, rising like a storm, filling the space around him, pressing against his chest. It rolled over him, through him, until his knees gave way beneath him. The next full moon. That was the price. That was the promise. He woke with a scream, but the nightmare did not end. The room around him, his great chamber of gold and silk, had changed. The golden coins scattered across his floors darkened as he washed. They bled into the earth, their shine fading, their warmth stolen. The curtains billowed though there was no wind. The walls, once polished and gleaming, paused as though alive, as though something lay beneath the surface, waiting. He ran from the house, into the night, but the whispers followed. The shadows moved with him, lengthening, stretching, twisting in shapes that did not belong to him. No matter how far he went, no matter how fast he ran, they were there. There was no place beyond their reach. The debt must be paid. The full moon rose, heavy and bright, casting its pale light over the village. The air was thick, unmoving, as if the world itself held its breath. Ola stood alone in the vast emptiness of his grand home. The wealth that had once surrounded him was nothing but dust. The gold had turned to sand, slipping through the cracks of the floor. The fine cloths had rotted, eaten away by unseen hands. The walls that had once gleamed were cold, lifeless, stripped of their beauty. The whispers grew louder. They no longer hid in the corners or in the wind. They called his name now, clear and unyielding. Ola. He turned, but there was nothing to see. The shadows stretched and twisted, creeping toward him, moving with a purpose of their own. He ran. Through the halls, down the steps, into the night. The village was still. No doors opened for him, no voices called out in greeting. The streets that had once been filled with celebration were now silent. The wind did not move the leaves. The air did not stir. Then came the laughter. It did not belong to the villagers. It did not belong to any living thing. It rose from the ground, from the sky, from the spaces between, deep and endless. Ola, did you think this was free? The spirits had come to collect. He fell to his knees, his voice breaking, pleading for mercy. He promised offerings, he promised prayers, he promised anything, anything to delay the fate that had been sealed. But the spirits do not bargain. The deal is sealed. The shadows rushed forward. Cold hands, unseen yet unshakable, wrapped around him, pulling, dragging. His cries echoed through the village, but no one came. No one saw. No one dared to look. By morning, Ola was gone. The house he had built stood empty, untouched, as if it had never known life. The marketplace no longer carried his name. His story became a whisper, spoken only in hushed tones, in warnings passed from elders to children. The seasons changed. The world moved on. At the market square, in the same place where Ola had once sat with his mega stall, a new trader took his place. A man with tired eyes and worn clothes, calling out to customers, watching the wealthier merchants pass him by. And somewhere, unseen, something waited. Because the path to riches is always there. The offer is always waiting. And there is always someone willing to pay the price. And so, the tale of Ola fades into the echoes of time, another name lost to the hunger of greed. His fate was sealed the moment he reached beyond what was meant for him, the moment he chose fortune over patience, power over peace. Would you have walked away, content with an honest life? Or would you have reached for the gold, knowing the cost? Do you believe Ola could have escaped his fate? What would you have done differently? Let me know in the comments below. For more chilling African folktales, like, subscribe, and share this story. Until next time, remember, every fortune has a price.